The crystalline spires of the Galactic Council's diplomatic hub glittered in the light of Aegis Prime. Each facet caught and refracted the star's golden rays, casting prisms across the atrium, where representatives from 100 worlds mingled. High above them, through the transparent dome ceiling, their ships hung in synchronous orbit, elegant, sleek vessels, representing the pinnacle of their civilization's achievements. All except one. The United Defense Fleet's flagship, the UDF Resilient, squatted among the delicate alien craft like a clenched fist. Its hull was reinforced with overlapping titanium plates, scorched black from atmospheric entries on a dozen worlds. Its weapon systems, though powered down in compliance with Council regulations, bulged from its silhouette like tumors, obvious, unavoidable, impossible to disguise. Admiral Selena Reyes stood at the observation deck, her dark eyes fixed on her ship. Her reflection ghosted against the viewport, a woman of average height, whose bearing made her seem taller, skin the color of burnished copper-black hair, pulled back in a severe bun, and the high collar of her navy blue uniform emphasizing the sharp line of her jaw. 30 years of service had left their mark lines at the corners of her eyes, a permanent furrow between her brows, and an unmistakable air of command. "The council session will begin in 10 minutes, Admiral said her aide, a fresh-faced lieutenant whose name she could never remember. "They're discussing the Zathari situation today." Celine nodded, still watching the Resilient. "Again, with no resolution again." "Ma'am, Ambassador Ko says they're making progress. The Council just needs time to—" "The Zathari don't have time." She turned away from the viewport, her expression hardening. "But we'll play the game. One more day of diplomacy, Lieutenant. Then we look at other options." The lieutenant's eyes widened slightly. "Other options, ma'am." Celine smiled, a grim curl of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. "Tell me, Lieutenant, why do they call Earth a death world?" "Because of our environment, ma'am. High-gravity extreme weather patterns, dangerous flora and fauna. Nearly 70% of our native wildlife could kill an unprotected member of most Council species." "Yes, and what does that make us?" The lieutenant hesitated. "Survivors, ma'am." "Exactly." Celine straightened her uniform jacket, tightening the cuffs around her wrists. "Let's go remind the Council what that means." The Council chamber was a marvel of alien architecture, a perfect hemisphere with concentric rings of seats flowing down to a central speaking platform. The acoustics were carefully designed to carry even a whisper throughout the room without amplification. Lights embedded in the walls shifted in subtle patterns that conveyed mood and priority to species sensitive to such things. It was beautiful, harmonious, and completely ineffective. Celine took her place in the observer section, the highest ring and furthest from the center. Earth's position in the galactic hierarchy was made abundantly clear by architecture. She closed her eyes briefly, listening to the endless procedural discussions, opening statements, and requests for clarification. "The chair recognizes the ambassador from the Zathari Cooperative," announced the Council President, a tentacled Halexian whose natural translucent flesh was dyed with status indicating bands of blue and gold. Ambassador Thal rose from his seat. Even bowed by worry, he was tall, nearly 7 feet of slender, graceful limbs. His skin shimmered with iridescent scales that fluctuated between turquoise and silver with his breathing patterns. The cranial fans that spread from the back of his head, usually a vibrant display of emotion, lay flat and dull. "Esteemed colleagues," he began, his voice melodic, despite the tension evident in his posture. "I come before you again to plead for intervention. The Drovak Armada has seized our outer colonies. They've blockaded our supply routes. Our planetary shields cannot withstand sustained bombardment beyond 45 standard cycles." His eyes, multifaceted, like a dragonfly's, swept the chamber. "We are a peaceful people. We have no military. We have always relied on the Council's protection, as is our right under Article 7 of the Charter." A slight murmur rippled through the chamber. "The Drovak Armada operates outside Council jurisdiction," said the Vex representative, whose species resembled nothing so much as a collection of geometric shapes, suspended in a magnetic field. We cannot be expected to provoke a war with... They're already at war. Thal's voice cracked, his cranial fans flaring briefly with distress. They're slaughtering colonists, my people. He regained control with visible effort. The Zathari joined this council because we believed in its principles: protection, cooperation, justice. And we are pursuing diplomatic channels, the council president said soothingly. We've dispatched envoys to open dialogue with the Drovak leadership. While they advance kilometer by kilometer across our worlds, Thal's composure shattered. By the time your envoys return, there will be no Zathari civilization left to save. Celine leaned forward, watching the drama unfold. The same debate had played out for weeks now, the Zathari begging for help, the council wringing their collective appendages, and the Drovak armada inexorably advancing. Earth's offers of military assistance had been politely declined. A Deathworld species was not to be trusted with peacekeeping operations. Too violent, too unpredictable, too human. Her communicator vibrated against her wrist. She glanced down. Urgent private channel request from Zathari Embassy. She slipped out of the chamber while the debate continued in circles. The Zathari Embassy was a modest structure compared to the sprawling compounds of the older council members. Its architecture emphasized openness, sliding screens rather than walls, gardens merging with interior spaces, water features that created harmonious background sounds as they flowed through the building. Today the screens were sealed, the fountains were still, the gardens were untended. Celine was led to a small room deep within the complex. Ambassador Thal was waiting, his head fans fully spread in agitation. "Thank you for coming, Admiral," he said, gesturing to a sitting cushion across from him. "I apologize for the secrecy." Celine remained standing. "Ambassador, I watched your military briefing to the council last week." He moved restlessly, his long fingers intertwining and separating. "About Earth's capabilities." "Yes." "Do you stand by your assessment that a human intervention force could reach Zathari Prime within 9 days and engage the Drovak Armada with a reasonable chance of success?" Celine's eyes narrowed. "I do. The UDF has been running simulations since this crisis began. We've studied the Drovak tactics from the limited footage available. We believe we can break their formations with unconventional maneuvers they won't be prepared for." Thal's head fans flattened. "The Council will never authorize it." "No," Celine agreed. "They won't." "But you don't need their authorization. Earth is an observer world. You're not bound by Council military directives." His multifaceted eyes glittered. "You could act independently." Celine was silent for a long moment. "That would have serious diplomatic consequences for Earth. We've worked for decades to earn the Council's trust to prove we're not the dangerous primitives they think we are." "And yet you are dangerous." Thal stepped closer. "You come from a world that tried to kill you at every turn. You evolved to survive conditions that would obliterate most Council species. Your bodies regenerate from injuries that would be fatal to a Zathari. Your military doctrines embrace chaos rather than fleeing from it." He paused. "We need that now." He moved to a control panel and activated a holographic display. The image of a world appeared, a beautiful azure globe with sprawling crystalline cities, visible even from orbit. Then, the perspective shifted, zooming in to show urban centers under bombardment. The elegant crystal structures shattered under relentless fire. Zathari civilians fled through streets glittering with the debris of their civilization. "This was transmitted 12 hours ago," Thal said quietly. "Our homeworld falls in 45 days unless help arrives. The Council will still be debating when the last Zathari dies." Celine watched the destruction, her face impassive, but her hands clenched at her sides. "I am formally requesting Earth's intervention," Thal said. "Not as a Council member to an observer world, but as one people to another. Help us, Admiral Reyes. You are our only hope." The UDF headquarters on Luna was a stark contrast to the Council's diplomatic hub. There were no crystal spires here, No elegant architecture designed to soothe and inspire. Just reinforced bunkers buried deep beneath the lunar surface, hardened against electromagnetic pulses and orbital bombardment. The war room was a windowless chamber, filled with holographic displays and the low murmur of officers monitoring communications from Earth's scattered defensive fleet. Celine stood at the central table, surrounded by Earth's Emergency Defense Council. The holographic image of Zathari Prime rotated slowly above them, red indicators showing Drovak fleet positions. "The Galactic Council has officially denied our request to intervene," she said. Ambassador Ko was told, and I quote, "Earth's military involvement would only escalate an already volatile situation. So we're supposed to watch a genocide because intervening wouldn't be diplomatic." General Ortiz's weathered face flushed with anger. "The Zathari are on the brink of extinction." "The Council is sending another diplomatic delegation," Celine replied, her tone making it clear what she thought of that solution. "The Drovak will stall the delegation while they finish their conquest," said Admiral Wong. "They've done it before with the Pelasians, the Vor Collective. By the time the Council admits diplomacy has failed, there's no one left to save." "What about the Zathari's own request for aid?" asked Director Hassan of Intelligence. "Ambassador Thal contacted you directly." Celine nodded. "He did, outside official channels." "That puts us in a difficult position," said Secretary Franklin, the civilian head of the Defense Council. "If we respond to the Zathari request without Council approval, we risk our observer status, potential sanctions, even expulsion. But if we don't respond," Celine countered, "we betray everything we claim to stand for. Protection of the innocent, defense against aggression, the right of all sentient beings to exist without fear of extinction." She looked around the table. "I didn't join the UDF to file reports and attend council debates, while entire civilizations are erased from the galaxy." "What's your recommendation, Admiral?" Secretary Franklin asked. Celine activated a control on the table. The holographic display shifted, showing the disposition of Earth's fleet. "I recommend immediate intervention. 3 battle groups centered around our heavy carriers, Resilient, Defiance, and Savage, complemented by our stealth frigates and interceptor squadrons." She highlighted the ships as she spoke. "The Zathari have provided detailed intelligence on Drovak shield frequencies and formation patterns. We can have the fleet assembled and ready to depart within 72 hours. "Casualties?" General Ortiz asked quietly. Celine didn't flinch from the question. "High. Our simulations indicate we could lose up to 40% of our engaged forces." A somber silence fell over the room. "That's thousands of lives," Secretary Franklin murmured. "If we wait, they all die," Celine said, slamming her palm against the table. "Every last Zathari, a civilization that's existed for 50,000 years, wiped out because we were afraid of diplomatic repercussions." The Defense Council exchanged glances. Secretary Franklin looked troubled. "We'll need to consult with the Global Security Cabinet. This decision exceeds our authority." "While you consult," Celine said, "I'll prepare the fleet. If the Cabinet approves, we'll be ready to move immediately." "And if they don't approve?" Admiral Wong asked. Celine's gaze was steady. "Then, I'll tender my resignation and you can find someone else to explain to the survivors why we did nothing." The Global Security Cabinet's deliberations lasted 18 hours. Representatives from Earth's coalition of nations argued passionately about the merits and risks of intervention, the economic impact of potential Council sanctions, the military cost in lives and materiel, the moral imperative to act versus the pragmatic value of Council membership. In the end, it was Congresswoman Rohan's speech that tipped the balance. "We were born on a world that tried to kill us," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "Our earliest ancestors survived predators with teeth longer than their arms. They endured ice ages and volcanic winters. They crossed oceans on vessels that by all rights should have sunk beneath the waves." She paused, looking around the room. "The Council calls us Deathworlders like it's something to be ashamed of. But our history on that dangerous world taught us something vital, that strength means nothing if not used to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The Zathari have answered our distress calls in the past, sending medical aid during the Jakarta tsunami relief supplies after the Amazon wildfires. Now they call to us. Will we answer? The cabinet voted 28-7 in favor of intervention. The UDF shipyards in Earth orbit became a hive of frantic activity. Engineers worked around the clock retrofitting vessels with the specialized equipment needed to combat the Drovak Armada. Hybrid kinetic plasma warheads were calibrated to the exact frequencies of Drovak shield systems based on the Zathari schematics. Stealth systems were enhanced to mask human biosignatures that Drovak sensors were particularly sensitive to. Commander Ito supervised the retrofitting of the Defiance's fighter squadrons, his team pushing the craft's engines beyond their rated specifications. They're designed to fly in formation, he explained to Celine during her inspection tour. Every battle they fought, they maintained perfect geometric patterns. Predictable, programmable. And our response, Celine asked. Ito grinned, tapping the side of his head. Chaos, Admiral. Beautiful human chaos. We've programmed our simulators with every aerial maneuver in our history, from World War I dogfights to the Martian rebellions. Tactics so old they're new again, with pilots crazy enough to fly them. In training simulators across the fleet, pilots pushed themselves to the limits, mastering unpredictable combat patterns that no algorithm could anticipate. Fatigue and stress mounted as simulation hours extended into days. Some washed out their reflexes, not quite sharp enough, their decision-making, not quite fast enough. Those who remained developed a feral confidence, a certainty that they could outfly and outfight the mechanistically perfect Drovak formations. Meanwhile, Celine faced a different battle in the diplomatic arena. Ambassador Ko reported that rumors of Earth's military preparations had reached the Council. Formal inquiries were being made. Threats of sanctions were whispered in the corridors of power. Let them inquire, Celine told her staff during a briefing. Our official position is that we're conducting exercises, standard training operations. The Drovak will know we're coming, pointed out Colonel Davis, her chief of intelligence. Yes, Celine agreed, but they won't know how or when, and they certainly won't expect what we're bringing. She studied the latest intelligence reports, her expression grim. The Zathari outer colonies have fallen. Refugee ships are being targeted as they flee. We need to move now. The day before launch, Ambassador Thal arrived on the Resilient. His tall frame seemed diminished, somehow bowed by the weight of his people's suffering. When he stepped onto the bridge, the officers fell silent, watching this representative of the people they were about to risk their lives for. Ambassador, Celine greeted him formally. Welcome aboard the UDF Resilient. Thal's cranial fans spread slightly, a gesture of respect and gratitude. Admiral Reyes, there are no words in your language or mine to express what this means to my people. Save your thanks until we've succeeded, Celine said. Would you like a tour of the ship? As they walked through the corridors of the massive vessel, Thal observed the crew at work, the purposeful efficiency, the quiet competence, the occasional burst of dark humor, quickly suppressed in the ambassador's presence. Your people prepare for war so naturally, he remarked. We've had a lot of practice, Celine replied. Too much, probably. They reached the observation deck, looking out at the assembled fleet. Hundreds of ships, from massive carriers to agile interceptors, gathered in precise formation. Earth gleamed blue and white beyond them. I've studied your history, Thal said softly. The conflicts, the bloodshed, the capacity for cruelty that made the Council so wary of admitting Earth even as an observer. He turned to face her. And yet here you are, preparing to sacrifice thousands of lives for a people not your own. Celine was silent for a long moment. The Council sees only one side of humanity, Ambassador. They focus on our capacity for violence because it frightens them. They don't understand that the same ferocity that makes us dangerous is what drives us to protect. Are we worth protecting? Thal asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The Zathari have contributed art, philosophy, healing techniques. But we have never fought, never killed. Some on your world would call us weak. Strength takes many forms, Celine replied. The choice to remain peaceful despite the capacity for violence that's not weakness. That's a kind of courage my species is still learning. Thal's cranial fans spread fully, a gesture of emotional openness, rarely shown to non-Zathari. When this is over, if we survive, the relationship between our peoples will be forever changed. Yes, Celine agreed. For the better, I hope. That night, alone in her quarters, Celine recorded messages for her family, her aging parents in Montevideo, her brother, and his children in the new African Union. Just in case. She'd done this before every major deployment of her career, but this time felt different. The stakes were higher. The enemy was unknown. The distances were vast. Are we saviors or invaders? She asked her empty room. The question had been gnawing at her since the cabinet's approval. Earth was about to project military power across interstellar distances, without the blessing of the galactic community they'd fought so hard to join. Would they be remembered as heroes or conquerors? Her communicator chimed the final launch sequence had begun. Time to put doubts aside. The UDF fleet departed Earth orbit at 0400 hours, slipping into FTL in groups of 10 to avoid detection by Council monitoring systems. Their destination, the Zathari home system, 9 days' journey at maximum sustainable speed. The first 3 days passed without incident. The fleet maintained communication silence, their stealth systems rendering them nearly invisible against the backdrop of space. Inside, the ship's crews settled into combat routines, endless drills, equipment checks, tactical briefings. The intelligence teams analyzed the latest Zathari data transmissions, updating their assault plans as the Drovac positions evolved. On the 4th day, the engineering section of the Defiance reported instabilities in their FTL drive. By the 5th day, similar issues were cropping up across the fleet. The human vessels had never operated at such high speeds for so long. Systems were failing, stress fractures were appearing in hull plating. Radiation leaks from overtaxed engines sent crew members to medical bays with radiation burns. We can't maintain this pace, Chief Engineer Santos reported during an emergency conference. Her dark skin was sallow with exhaustion, her eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights, trying to keep the resilient systems functional. The drives weren't designed for this kind of sustained output. Can we make it to the Zathari system? Celine asked. Santos hesitated. Maybe, but we'll be limping in with half our systems compromised. The Drovac will cut us to pieces. Options. We can drop out of FTL, make repairs, then continue. That adds 3 days to our journey time. 3 days the Zathari didn't have. Celine shook her head. Unacceptable. Find another way. Santos looked like she wanted to argue, then nodded sharply. Yes, ma'am. The engineering teams worked miracles over the next 2 days. They cannibalized non-essential systems for parts. They reconfigured power distributions with the kind of creative improvisation that humans had elevated to an art form. They performed EVAs to repair hull breaches, while traveling at speeds that would turn a human body to atoms if the protective fields failed. 2 smaller vessels were lost, the frigate Hyperion, when its reactor containment failed, and the corvette Swift Vengeance, when it collided with an uncharted stellar remnant. 800 lives gone in an instant. The fleet observed a moment of silence, then continued their desperate race. On the 8th day, they detected the first signs of Drovac activity, patrol ships at the edge of the Zathari system, maintaining a blockade against refugee vessels. The UDF fleet dropped out of FTL just beyond sensor range, using the gravitational shadow of a gas giant to mask their arrival. Deploy scout drones, Celine ordered. I want a complete tactical picture before we commit. The data that came back was sobering. The Drovac had established a tight perimeter around Zathari Prime. Warships hung in precise geometric formations, spheres, cubes, and pyramids of military might, maintaining their positions with machine-like precision. Ground forces had already landed on the smaller continents, establishing beachheads for the final invasion. Ambassador Thal studied the holographic display with horror. We've lost the southern continent, he whispered. the crystal forests, the temple of ancestors, all gone. But the main population centers are still intact, Celine pointed out. Your planetary shield is holding. Barely. It was never designed to withstand this kind of assault. Celine called her command staff together. We have 24 hours before the Zathari shields fail. We need to break the Drovak fleet and relieve the ground pressure immediately. She nodded to Colonel Davis. Present the attack plan. Davis activated the tactical display. We've identified a weakness in the Drovak formation. Their fleet is arranged in concentric shells around the planet, with their command and control vessels at the center. Each shell can provide overlapping fire support to adjacent formations, creating an interlocking defense grid. The weakness, General Ortiz pressed. They rely on centralized command. Their capital ships transmit tactical instructions to the rest of the fleet. If we can disrupt those transmissions, their formations will become vulnerable. Davis highlighted a region of space near Zathari's shattered moon. We propose a three-pronged assault. Battle Group Alpha will engage the outer shell here, drawing their fire and attention. Battle Group Beta will then exploit the gap created to penetrate to this point within range of their command vessels. And the third prong? Asked Admiral Wong. Celine nodded to Lieutenant Kai Anders, who stepped forward. A compact man with the coiled energy of a predator, Anders commanded the UDF's Special Operations Division. My team will board one of the Drovak command vessels, he said simply. We'll upload a virus designed to sever the C-Link network that coordinates their fleet movements. Without central direction, their formations will break down. A stunned silence followed his words. That's a suicide mission, Admiral Wong finally said. Anders didn't flinch. We prefer to think of it as a high-risk operation with acceptable casualties, given the strategic objective. Celine studied the faces of her officers. This isn't a democracy, but I want every concern on the table now. Once we commit, there's no turning back. The debate was brief, but intense. The risks were weighed against the alternatives. The cost in human lives against the extinction of an entire civilization. In the end, there was only one choice they could live with. We go in at 0600, Celine decided. All vessels at battle stations by 0500. Lieutenant Anders, your team drops at 0630. I want everyone crystal clear on their objectives and contingencies. She looked around the table one last time. This is what we trained for. This is why Earth built this fleet. We don't let civilizations die when we can prevent it. The human attack began exactly as planned, and immediately deviated into the kind of improvised chaos that defined their military doctrine. Battle Group Alpha, led by the carrier Savage, burst out of the shadow of Zathari's shattered moon. 10 human warships against 80 Drovak corvettes, arrayed in perfect defensive positions. By any conventional analysis, it was a slaughter in the making. But the Savage didn't attack conventionally. As the Drovak vessels adjusted their formation to bring weapons to bear, the human ship launched its payload, not missiles or energy weapons, but clouds of specialized nanomaterial that expanded rapidly in the vacuum of space. The clouds absorbed and scattered the Drovak sensor pulses, creating a zone of effective blindness. Into this blindness came the Resilient, with Battle Group Beta approaching from a vector the Drovak had left relatively undefended, because it required navigating through a field of lunar debris no rational commander would risk. The human vessels threaded through the drifting fragments, their helmsmen performing feats of navigation that had the Zathari observers gasping in disbelief. The first wave of kinetic projectiles struck the rear of the Drovak formation. Specially calibrated to resonate with their shield frequencies, the weapons did far more damage than their yield would suggest. Drovak vessels tumbled out of formation, their perfect alignment shattered. They're adapting. Colonel Davis reported studying the tactical displays, reconfiguring their shields to block our attack profile. As expected, Celine replied. Launch the second wave with the modified frequencies. And so it went, the humans changing tactics every few minutes, the Drovac responding with increasing delays as their command and control system struggled to process the unpredictable assault patterns. It wasn't a fair fight. The Drovac still outnumbered the human forces, nearly 8-1. But it wasn't the overwhelming massacre it should have been either. In the midst of this controlled chaos, a small stealth shuttle detached from the Defiance and slipped through the debris field toward the largest Drovac vessel, a Dreadnought-class ship that served as the secondary command hub. On board were Lieutenant Kai Anders and his team of 12 Special Forces operatives, each carrying enough explosives to level a small building and a data package designed to disrupt the most sophisticated military network ever encountered by humanity. "Approach vector clear," reported Specialist Rodriguez, the team's pilot. Her fingers danced over the controls, making minute adjustments to their course. "But they've increased their point defense coverage. It's going to be hot when we breach." "When, isn't it?" Anders replied with a tight smile. "Everyone check seals. We'll decompress on approach to reduce thermal signature." The shuttle grew frigid as the atmosphere was evacuated. The team's combat suits automatically compensated, becoming their entire environment. Rodriguez killed the inertial dampeners for the final approach, another strategy to avoid detection, though it meant they felt every violent maneuver as she dodged debris and occasional defensive fire. "Impact in 5, she announced. "Charges ready." The shuttle struck the hull of the Drovac vessel with a carefully calculated force, enough to secure a position, but not enough to trigger automatic defensive protocols. Breaching charges flared silently in the vacuum, carving an entry point through the outer armor. "Go, go, go." Anders led the way, propelling himself through the newly created aperture and into the dimly lit interior of the enemy ship. The boarding team had studied what little was known of Drovac ship design, but reality never perfectly matched intelligence briefings. They found themselves in a utility corridor where the artificial gravity was minimal, a blessing that allowed them to move quickly and quietly through the vessel by pushing off surfaces rather than walking. "Life signs?" Anders asked softly through the team comm. "Minimal," replied Specialist Kim, studying her scanner. "Drovac ships are primarily automated. The few crew members are concentrated in the command nucleus. And our target? 3 decks down, 2 sections forward. The central data hub that manages the command network." They moved through the ship like ghosts, using their scanners to avoid the few Drovac crew members and the more numerous security drones that patrolled the corridors. When confrontation was unavoidable, they struck with silent efficiency, flash charges that overloaded the drone's sensors, neural disruptors that incapacitated the organic crew without killing them. "These aren't soldiers," Anders had emphasized during the mission briefing. "They're technicians, engineers. We kill only if absolutely necessary." At the entrance to the data hub, they encountered their first serious resistance. A squad of Drovac security units, armored figures that might have been fully synthetic or heavily augmented organic beings, it was impossible to tell, guarded the massive doors. "6 targets, whispered Specialist Durand, the team's tactical officer. "Standard breach formation." Anders nodded. "On my mark." The team attacked from multiple angles simultaneously. Stun grenades disrupted the Drovac sensory systems, while precisely aimed shots from mass accelerator weapons found the weak points in their armor. The fight was brief, brutal, and entirely one-sided. The Drovac were prepared for conventional military assaults, not the close-quarters combat that humans had perfected over millennia of fighting each other. Inside the data hub, they found what they were looking for: a vast chamber filled with processing nodes, each glowing with the strange blue-green light that characterized Drovac technology. At the center was a structure that resembled nothing so much as a mechanical heart, pulsing with energy, as it coordinated the activities of the entire Drovac fleet. "Plant the charges," Anders ordered. "We need to be sure." As his team placed explosives at key structural points, Specialist Patel connected their data package to the system. "Initiating upload," she reported. "Estimated completion time, 3 minutes." Anders frowned. Too long. They'll detect the intrusion. As if in response to his words, alarms began to sound throughout the ship. The lighting shifted to a pulsing crimson. They're onto us, Durand warned. Multiple contacts converging. How long? Anders asked Patel. 2 minutes 40 seconds. We don't have that long. He made a swift decision. Team back to the shuttle. I'll finish here. Sir, Durand began to object. That's an order, specialist. Get everyone clear. I'll be right behind you. It was a lie, and they all knew it. But military discipline held. The team retreated while Anders remained at the console with Patel. Go, he told her. I just need to monitor the upload. She hesitated, then clasped his shoulder briefly before following the others. Anders watched the progress bar advancing too slowly across the display. The sounds of approaching Drovak security forces echoed through the corridors. He glanced at the explosives his team had placed then at the central processor, the heart of the Drovak command network. There was another way, a faster way. He opened a channel to the Resilient. Admiral, this is Anders. The upload is taking too long. I'm going to try something else. Lieutenant Celine's voice came back. Report your status. No time, ma'am. Just tell my sister I figured it out, okay? The puzzle she gave me last time I was home. It was the quantum entanglement theorem, not the wave function collapse. Before Celine could respond, he cut the connection and moved to the central processor. Its architecture was alien, but its purpose was clear enough. The Drovak relied on perfect information exchange to maintain their tactical advantage. If that exchange was disrupted not by a virus that could be quarantined, but by physical destruction of the network hub, their entire battle strategy would collapse. The security forces were close now. He could hear them assembling outside the data hub. The charges his team had planted would destroy the processor, but not before the Drovak could stop the self-destruct sequence. There was only one certain method. Anders climbed onto the processor housing, ignoring the energy field that burned through his suit and into his flesh. He reached for the core breaker, a manual override that would sever the connections to the network relays in case of catastrophic system failure. It was protected by multiple failsafes designed to prevent exactly what he was attempting. The door to the data hub exploded inward. Drovak security forces poured through the opening, weapons raised. Anders smiled grimly and pulled the lever with all his strength. The effect was immediate and devastating. Throughout the Drovak fleet, command signals ceased. The perfect formations began to drift apart as individual vessels lost their coordinated instructions. Some ships continued firing at pre-designated targets. Others simply hung in space awaiting orders that would never come. A few actually collided with their neighbors as their navigation systems failed. The UDF battle groups seized the advantage with a swiftness that would have been ruthless if they'd been fighting against a peer opponent. But without the coordinating effect of their network, the Drovak vessels were like scattered puzzle pieces, each powerful in isolation, but no longer forming a coherent whole. Battle Group Alpha, close to engagement range, and target their weapon systems, Celine ordered. Battle Group Beta moved to cover the Zathari urban centers. Any Drovak vessel that approaches the planetary shield is to be disabled by any means necessary. The human fleet swarmed among the disorganized Drovak ships, like wolves among a scattered herd. The battle became a series of individual engagements, rather than the choreographed clash of formations, precisely the kind of fighting humans excelled at. General Ortiz coordinated the fighter squadrons, sending them against the larger Drovak vessels in waves. Commander Ito's pilots proved their worth, executing maneuvers that Drovak targeting systems simply couldn't predict or counter. Drovak flagship is trying to establish an alternate command network, Colonel Davis reported. They're broadcasting on all frequencies. Jam them, Celine ordered. Keep them isolated. The battle raged for hours. Human vessels took heavy damage. The Drovak weapons were formidable, even without central coordination. 2 destroyers and a cruiser were lost with all hands. But for each human ship destroyed, a dozen Drovak vessels were disabled or forced to retreat. By the 18th hour, the tide had definitively turned. The remaining Drovac vessels began to withdraw, abandoning their ground forces and retreating to the edge of the system. "They're running," Admiral Wang said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Let them go," Celine replied. "We didn't come here to annihilate them, just to stop them." She studied the tactical display, noting the disposition of the remaining human forces. "Begin rescue operations. I want joint human-Zathari task forces to evacuate civilians from the combat zones. Deploy all available medical teams to the surface." Dr. Lena Mahmoud led the first medical team to reach the Zathari capital. A tall woman with bronze skin and prematurely gray hair, she had become the UDF's foremost expert on xenobiology through a combination of brilliant research and practical field experience. As her shuttle descended through the atmosphere, she gazed out at the devastation below: crystalline towers, shattered by bombardment; once beautiful plazas, cratered by heavy weapons fire; the elegant canal system that had been the city's circulatory system, now choked with debris. "It's going to be chaos down there," she told her team. "The Zathari have never experienced warfare on this scale. Their medical services are overwhelmed and undersupplied. Our priority is to establish field hospitals and triage centers, then train local medical personnel in emergency protocols." The shuttle landed in what had once been a botanical garden, now repurposed as a rallying point for survivors. Zathari of all ages huddled in makeshift shelters, their iridescent scales dulled with dust and fear. Many bore injuries, burns from energy weapons, lacerations from shattered crystal, broken limbs from collapsed structures. A group of Zathari healers approached cautiously, their cranial fans spread in a gesture that mingled hope and wariness. The tallest among them spoke in carefully practiced English. "You are the humans, the warriors who drove back the Drovac." "We're doctors," Mahmoud answered. "Warriors of a different sort. We've come to help your wounded." The Zathari exchanged glances, their fans fluttering in a silent communication. Then, the tall one stepped forward again. "We welcome your aid, though our physiology is very different from yours." "I've studied Zathari anatomy for years," Mahmoud assured him. "We brought medical supplies specifically designed for your species." She gestured to her team, who began unloading equipment from the shuttle. "Show us where to set up and we'll get to work." Over the next several days, human medical teams worked alongside Zathari healers across the stricken planet. The cultural exchange was as vital as the medical one, the humans, bringing their hard-won expertise in trauma care. The Zathari contributing their profound understanding of regenerative techniques. "Your people heal differently than mine," Mahmoud explained to a group of Zathari medical apprentices. "You focus on long-term recovery, cellular regeneration at the deepest level. It's beautiful medicine, but slow." She demonstrated a field dressing on an injured Zathari child. "In a crisis like this, we need to stabilize as many patients as possible as quickly as possible. Triage, treatment, transport. The 3 T's of emergency medicine." The Zathari absorbed these lessons with remarkable speed, adapting human techniques to their own physiological needs. By the 5th day, mixed teams of human and Zathari medical personnel were operating with seamless efficiency, saving thousands who would otherwise have died waiting for traditional treatments. Meanwhile, the military situation continued to evolve. The Drovac ground forces, abandoned by their fleet, fought with desperate intensity. Human infantry units deployed from the fleet engaged them in urban combat throughout the smaller continents. The fighting was brutal and costly. The Drovac were physically stronger than humans and equipped with advanced weaponry. But the UDF soldiers had one critical advantage: they were fighting to protect, not to conquer. By the 10th day after the fleet's arrival, the last organized Drovac resistance had been eliminated. The cost had been staggering. Out of 300 human vessels, only 180 remained operational. Nearly 30,000 UDF personnel had been killed or seriously wounded. But Zathari Prime was secure. The extinction of a civilization had been prevented. A somber memorial service was held on the great sky bridge of the Zathari capital, a sweeping crystal arch that connected the two tallest spires of the city. Representatives from both species gathered to honor the fallen. The Zathari created crystalline sculptures for each human ship, lost in the battle, intricate structures that caught the light of their sun and refracted it in patterns unique to each vessel's service history. Selene stood with Ambassador Thal watching as the names of the dead were projected into the air above the assembly human, and Zathari listed without distinction. "You're Lieutenant Anders," Thal said quietly. "He knew he wouldn't survive his mission, didn't he?" "Yes," Selene replied. "He knew." "Why would he make such a sacrifice for a people not his own?" Selene considered the question carefully. "Because he could. Because it needed to be done. Because somewhere in our long, violent history, humans learned that our capacity for self-sacrifice is as definitive of our species as our capacity for destruction." Thal's cranial fans spread in a gesture of profound respect. "The Council never understood your people. They saw only the danger, never the courage." "They'll understand now," Selene said. "For better or worse." The diplomatic aftermath unfolded more rapidly than anyone had anticipated. The Galactic Council, confronted with the reality of the human intervention and its success, found itself in an unprecedented situation. The observer species they had kept at arm's length had just prevented the extinction of a full council member without authorization, but with undeniable moral justification. Emergency sessions were called. Debates raged in the Great Chamber. Some members called for sanctions against Earth for violating council protocols. Others advocated for immediate full membership in recognition of their service. The Zathari, for their part, formally petitioned for Earth to be granted not just membership, but a seat on the Security Committee. 2 weeks after the battle, Selene was summoned to address the assembled council. She stood on the central platform, no longer relegated to the observer section, wearing her full dress uniform, with its row of campaign medallions. The chamber was filled to capacity with representatives from every council species present to hear humanity's defense. Admiral Reyes, the council president, began, "You stand before us to account for Earth's unilateral military action in the Zathari system. While the outcome was fortuitous, the precedent is deeply troubling. Observer worlds cannot be permitted to deploy military forces without council authorization." Selene nodded. "I understand the council's concerns, President Voss. Earth did not take this action lightly, nor do we wish to establish a precedent of military intervention whenever we disagree with council decisions." "Yet that is precisely what you did," the Vex representative pointed out. "No," Selene replied firmly. "What we did was answer a direct plea for help from a civilization facing extinction. The Zathari formally requested our aid when the Council's response proved insufficient. We acted not as an observer world defying the Council, but as one people extending a hand to another in their moment of greatest need." A murmur ran through the chamber. "The Zathari should have followed proper protocols," the Vex insisted. "All requests for military assistance must be channeled through the Council's Defense Committee." "With respect," Selene countered, "by the time such a request would have been processed, there would have been no Zathari left to save." She paused, looking around the chamber. The Council was founded on principles of mutual protection and cooperation. When those principles are subordinated to procedural concerns, the entire foundation of this body is undermined. Ambassador Thal rose from his seat. "The Zathari Cooperative formally withdraws any complaint against Earth's actions. More than that, we declare ourselves forever indebted to Admiral Reyes and the United Defense Fleet. They came when we called. They bled for our people. They honored the true spirit of this council, when others would hide behind its procedures." More voices joined the debate, some supporting Earth, others condemning their actions. The discussion continued for hours, with Selene standing calmly at the center, answering questions with unflinching honesty. Finally, the council president called for order. "We have heard enough to make a determination. Admiral Reyes, while the council cannot condone the manner of Earth's intervention, we cannot deny its necessity or its success. Therefore, We extend to Earth an invitation for full council membership, with all attendant rights and responsibilities." A cheer went up from the Zathari section. Other species joined more sedately, but the approval was clear. Selene bowed slightly. "On behalf of Earth, I accept this honor. We pledge ourselves to the defense of all peaceful civilizations, to the protection of the vulnerable, and to the preservation of diversity across the galaxy." She paused, her gaze sweeping the chamber. "We were called. We came. We choose to protect. That is the promise of Earth to this council and to all its members." 1 year later, the flagship of the newly formed Galactic Defense Coalition hung in orbit above a distant moon. The UDF Deathworld, as it had been christened in a ceremony attended by representatives from 20 species, was the most powerful military vessel ever constructed, a blend of human aggression, Zathari crystalline technology, and contributions from a dozen other council members who had finally recognized the value of a defensive force. On its bridge, Admiral Selene Reyes studied the tactical display with her mixed-species crew. Humans served alongside Zathari Vex Halexians, and even a few Drovak defectors, who had chosen a different path after witnessing the defeat of their armada. "Status report, Commander Thal," she asked. The Zathari officer, once Ambassador Thal's aide, now a commissioned officer in the coalition, consulted his display. "All systems nominal, Admiral. The evacuation of Mira Colony is proceeding according to schedule. 87% of civilians have been transported to safe locations. And the incoming anomaly, still on course, impact projected in 43 hours. Selene nodded. The threat this time wasn't an invading army, but a rogue planetoid on a collision course with an inhabited moon. The Coalition's mission was to evacuate the population, and if possible divert the celestial body. A different kind of battle, but no less vital to those in danger. Her communicator chimed with an incoming transmission, a distress call from a system near the galactic rim. Unknown aggressors, civilian casualties, a desperate plea for help. Selene raised an eyebrow as she studied the details. Then she smiled and turned to her crew. "Once the Mira evacuation is complete, set course for the Vega outpost. Priority 1. Another call for help, Admiral, asked Lieutenant Rodriguez, who had survived the Drovak battle and earned a well-deserved promotion. "Yes," Selene replied simply, "and we will answer it." Around her, human and alien crew members alike nodded in understanding. They were the inheritors of Kai Anders's sacrifice of the 30,000 humans who had died to save the Zathari of countless others throughout history, who had stood against aggression and said no further. They were Deathworlders, and that meant something far greater than the Council had ever understood. The Galactic Defense Coalition was their legacy, protection their mandate, sacrifice their tradition. When the call came, they would answer. They always would.